Have you ever been looking to pick up a new set of reloading dies and see if there's an option for both standard and small base dies? Did you ever wonder, do I really need those small base dies, or should I just be picking up a standard die instead? Maybe you have an issue with your reloaded cases feeding reliably. Would a small base die help that? Today we'll explore differences in these two types of reloading dies to see which one is the correct one for you. A standard resizing die resizes the full length of the case, including the shoulder and the body of the case. This ensures compatibility with most chambers in most applications. Standard reloading dies are designed to resize brass back to within SAMI specifications. For most applications, these work just fine. So why would you want to choose a small base die? Well, I could jokingly tell you that if you wanted to increase your chances of getting a stuck case by at least 74.62%, you should choose the small base die option. And while you are slightly more likely to get a stuck case in a small base die, it's clearly not its desirable feature. So why then? So small base dies resize the cases to a slightly smaller dimension than a standard die. They're primarily suited for smaller chambers or semi-automatic applications that can benefit from easier feeding and extraction. Are your reloads not feeding as smoothly as factory offerings? It might be time to try a small base die. But there is another reason to give these small base dies a try, and that is bulk brass. Now I realize sometimes that buying a large bag of fired brass is appealing if you're strictly looking at cost per case. And frankly, that's why I needed to pick up this small base die in 308. When dealing with the brass of unknown pedigree, there's one thing you can count on: mixed results. So we're going to take a look to see what these two different dies can accomplish as far as sizing goes. I picked some Lake City brass out of my large pile of 750 cases of 308 that I purchased and sorted it by case head dimension. From our pile of brass, it didn't take too long to find brass that measured anywhere from .468 something to .473 something. While to some this may not seem like a lot of variance, you really don't typically do a lot of sizing to the base of the case when you're resizing, so this is quite a bit of case head expansion to deal with. Fired brass from my 308 comes out to be almost exactly .470 inches. So here's a couple measurements for comparison. Our new Starline brass, clearly never fired, has a base dimension of .468 inches, right out of the bag. These easily feed with no issue, just as you would expect. It's new brass. But what happens when we start sizing these Lake City cases that have their bases expanded all the way out to .473 inches? They don't size down enough to fit in my chamber. That's what they do. These are both bushing dies, but when we're talking about the case head dimensions, that's really not going to be a factor for today's discussion. Either of these two dies, as well as the Short Action Customs bushings that I'm using in them, are available at my channel sponsor, Midway USA. So both of these dies are essentially the same, except one is small base and the other is standard. So let's take some measurements to see how well they perform. Now first, taking all these measurements is not a perfect science. These were the best measurements that I can make with my micrometers, not calipers. Calipers are not going to be accurate enough to make these measurements. If you want more digits, you need a set of micrometers. Our brass that had our case expanded all the way to .473, our standard die only resized that to .4708. Another case that started out at .4725 only made it down to .4706. Both of those cases would not load into my bolt action 308. Going down to a starting case head dimension of .471 and .4709, anywhere from .4698, .4702, those ones were starting to fit a little bit easier. So basically, as long as our dimension was below .471 to start with, we had relatively good luck of getting these to feed. So we can see with our standard die, it's a little bit of a mixed bag whether we could even use the brass. But now let's look at the small base. Our small base die, starting roughly with the same dimensions, keep in mind we had to have different brass here, .4726, those both yielded base dimensions down at .4963 and .469. Going even smaller at .471, we're getting down to .4686. And clearly as the dimension got smaller, our sizes got down a little bit with it. So if I wanted to be able to use 100% of my brass, I need to be able to use the small base die. So you can see that the small base dies size the brass more. Hopefully that didn't shock you and knock you straight out of your seat. Technically, the whole body of the case is sized more with the small base dies. Up by the shoulder, the case is different by about 0.02, somewhere in that ballpark. 0.02 may not seem like an awful lot until you're sizing the cases. The additional force needed for the small base dies to size the brass on the .473 inch is extremely obvious. You clearly want some good quality lube to make sure you're not sticking any of your cases. On the product page for the small base dies, it states, due to the fact that the product sizes to minimum specifications, it is crucial to use a sufficient amount of high-quality lubricant to prevent stuck cases. But when you need that extra sizing to get them fit in the chamber, that's just what you're going to have to do. How well they feed is just night and day's difference. Ultimately, the choice between standard reloading dies and small base dies is going to depend on your specific chamber dimensions and your choice of components. Now, if you're wondering why I chose these neck bushings from Short Action Customs, check out this video right here and you can see just how much better they perform than the other bushings that I've tried. I hope this video helped you out, and I hope to see you in the next video.